Hello, I'm Mike and welcome back to the workshop. And this week I'm going back to our woodworking on a budget series. So stay tuned, I'm going to show you how to make a really nice shop stool that you can use inside as well. So let's grab our tools and roll the credits. So this here is my old reliable shop stool. As you can see, it's seen a life. It's been painted on, it's been sat on. I need to upgrade. This is just made out of scraps I had when I needed something. So why do you need one of these? Well, you need to sit down. That's the first thing, sometimes in the workshop. This is also a great little step up for reaching things that are just slightly higher. And you can use it, as I have many times, as a base for cutting or putting stuff on. You want to keep separate other areas, spray, finish, whatever. So as I said, these are made out of just bits of cheap material. I'm going to make the new one out of deal. This is just 4x1 deal that you can get in any shop. Not in any shop, obviously, in any hardware shop. So this is what's known as 4x1 planed. You should be able to get all the material you need for the stool that we're going to make out of one length. You're going to need three 350mm long pieces to make the top, 4 440 long pieces to make the legs, and then you're going to need one 320 piece to make this little division here, the stretcher that serves the purpose of you have to put stuff in there if you have to, and also strengthens up the legs. So the first thing I'm going to do is cut off my pieces for the top, because they're all square cuts. Get that glued up, and then while it's gluing, I'm going to start working on these sides. As you can see, these sides are splayed. Don't worry about cutting the angles, it's very simple. I'll show you a few tricks for that. You don't have tools. Now for this project, we're going to be adding 2 tools to our cheapest toolkit in the West. One is this. It is a plug cutter. What it does is cuts a plug of material that goes into a pre-bored hole. That means that when we screw this together, we'll have to put a plug over it, and that joint will be almost invisible. And a coping saw. We'll use the coping saw to create this filigree here on the bottom, or whatever I call it. It not only makes it look a bit nicer, it also gives you 4 points of contact, which means it sits more steadily on the ground. So let's go down to the bench, start cutting up our material for our top. So as I said earlier, I want 3 pieces cut at 350 to make my top. So I'm going to be square or mark a 350 and cut all 3 the same size, very simply, just using our handy dandy handsaw. I've explained cutting before in these videos, so I'm not really going to bore you with it, but I'll just go through it very quickly. The best way to get a square edge or square cut is you want 2 lines to follow. So you want your line across your face and then down your edge as you're cutting. Now I'm putting on this side for demonstration purposes, but I'll put it on the other side when I'm cutting. So as you're cutting, you want to stick to both of those lines. And then you should have a straight line. So start at the corner, go down a little bit with both of them, keeping an eye on that. And once we're the whole way down on that face, start working across the front edge. Now I'm cutting these here a little bit long because there's going to be some movement when we're gluing. And when we're all glued up at the end, we'll do one long cut with the handsaw to square up that edge. So, rule when you're repeating, take the piece you've cut, lay it down on whatever you're doing, and mark off that. That means you don't make any silly mistakes like we all have, where you add an inch, take an inch away. Just keep rinsing and repeating until you have them all cut. So here are my 3 pieces cut. So in gluing these together, I've mentioned this before, you want to alternate the grain lines. And I don't matter. Basically what that means is we're going to make a block out of 3 pieces like this. So I have 3 pieces like that, and on one you want the crown going that way, the other you want it going that way, and the other you want it going that way. This helps keep it steady because it's fighting itself. It always wants to go up this way, cup that way. And if you had all 3 of them going that way, it would be very easy for the whole thing to come in a dish. But with this middle one going the opposite direction, it keeps it a lot more steady. So I'm just laying out my pieces, checking my fit, checking that my grain alternating. I also want to pick good sides, because this could also be an interior project. So I'm going to pick the best of the sides with the correct grain direction. And then we'll look at gluing them up. Now the thing about this plain all sides material is sometimes it's not perfect. And I don't know if you can see there, I'll zoom in. You can see there a little crack. So these probably would squeeze together and they will be okay, but it's good practice to practice jointing. So I'm going to get our plane, and I'm going to give this a few rubs. Try to get a full length, full width shaving, and it should tighten up. Take the smallest amount you can. It's very easy to go wrong very quickly with a plane. And we have all of these 3 tight. We'll clamp them up and let it dry.
So to explain that a little bit better, when you're jointing, you want to make sure you're keeping your weight towards the back of the plane. That longer straight piece on the base will give you a straight line. If you were applying your weight to the front or evenly, you would end up copying whatever curve or dip was already on the piece of material. So if you keep doing that and keep the weight back, your shavings will get longer and longer until eventually they're the full length. It's also very important to take the smallest bite that you can with the plane. It's very easy to very quickly mess up when you're doing this kind of stuff. So take the thinnest shaving possible.
After a bit of careful playing, we're nice and tight in all these joints. So what I've done as well here is I've indexed them, so I put 1 line here and 2 lines here. That means that when I assemble them, I put them back the way they should be. It also helps me line everything up and make sure that we have that up and down that we want. So now all we need to do is grab a bit of glue and our clamps.
So in addition to our clamps that we normally use here, I'm going to lay down a little bit of greaseproof paper on my bench. The great thing about greaseproof paper is the glue won't stick to it. And so I'll just lay a bit down and then I'll clamp everything up.
that's that done. The process for the legs is the same. I won't bore you by showing that. So we'll do a jump cut to tomorrow when all this is to dry, and we can start cutting and assembling. Right, so these have had 24 hours to dry. Off camera I cut our top length, so now I want to mark for the width cut here. And I'm just going to cut that using the oldest clamp in the world, my knee, and our existing low stool. So let's do that really quick. And I want a 250 depth here. I find that works. So if we look at our example here, you can see that the legs are splayed. Now this spreads out the weight and gives us a greater footprint, which adds this ability. So this degree, this angle, sorry, in here, is 15 degrees. So to get that angle, as I've shown many times before, you can use your compass to create a little cardboard template. You could also transfer that angle and glue two pieces of timber together to make yourself a rudimentary bevel square. I'm just going to use my bevel square here because I have one. They're not very expensive. You want to add it to your kit as well. So first thing is to get this angle here, this 15 degree angle. Then I'll transfer it onto my sides and cut my top and bottom cuts.
Now, unfortunately, my camera died while I was filming this piece. The important thing when you're cutting these is to make sure that you cut them as parallelograms for the side. That means that the angles will be facing the right way when you want to cut. And cutting it is the same as any other cut. The only difference is you want to clamp it up vertically and just follow your lines down. I normally strike a line on both sides so I can follow it the whole way down.
So now we have these two cut, that's our sides. And when I was doing that using the same method, I cut our stretcher. The only difference with our stretcher is that the angles, rather than going parallel, they're opposing, so it's coming to a point. That'll dictate our width. So I'm going to grab my top, we'll work out where we want to position this, we'll mark it and screw it. So in my original, about 120 down, gives me a good spread. So we'll check how that works out on this one. I'm just going to introduce these two to my top. Again, this is all very rough. Just see where we are with that at the 120 mark. This is only guesstimation. That's pretty good. So I'm happy to put that support in at 120 as well. So I'll transfer my lines around, which will allow me to drill in from this side. But first I'm going to drill the little pockets for the plugs.
So with the line transferred over, what I do is just center my stretcher and measure off it, and that'll give me a position to drill these holes.
So now we're going to cut for our little plugs. So this is the plug cutter I showed you at the start. What you need to do is to get a drill bit that matches the plug cutter. It should fit tightly or slightly loose. This is a 10mm plug. So the first thing I do is I'm going to drill a hole a few mil deep before I drill my pilot hole. And I'm going to use this, cut two little plugs, shove into it once they're screwed together. So I'll just demonstrate cutting the plugs, do a little tester here so you can see what I'm talking about. So what I like to do, particularly when I'm doing something like this as important as tight, is run the bit in reverse a few times, which breaks the fibres at the edge. Then drill my hole. You get a much cleaner hole. Just run it in reverse before you put in. Now grab our plug cutter on a piece on a scrap piece that matches the grain very closely. Right. We'll drill in, get our plug, and we'll use a chisel or screwdriver or something to take our plug out, and then apply glue to our plug and we'll line the grain up. That's very important to make it look invisible. And just tap the plug in, let it dry. We'll come along with a chisel, cut it off. And this spreads out a little bit as it's glued. I want to give it a little sand. End up with an almost invisible. So that's what I want to use on this for all my attachment points. So when I screw through the sides and when I screw through the top. So let's do that first.
So in order to make sure that my holes here will line up when it's all assembled, I use my bevel square to get my angle as a reference. Now one thing I would do for the next one is I would actually drill these holes for the plugs at 90 degrees and then drill my pilot hole at the 15 degrees. The reason for this is that slight elongation of the hole meant that my plugs didn't fit as tightly as I would like, so learn from my mistakes. And since I already have these holes drilled to 15 degrees, I can just reference off the side of the hole here to make my pilot. So I went in straight with these, but as I explain later, I went back and wobbled it side to side to give a bit of expansion.
So now we have these bored. I could just assemble it now, but I think we'll make it look a bit nicer. So what I want to do is I want to add a taper to the sides, and I want to add a little scoopy detail here to the bottom, just to make it look that bit nicer and make it more stable. So first thing I'm going to do is the taper. To mark this, all I'm going to do is come in, say 15, let's say 20 mil on each side. And then score it down to nothing, and we'll leave the line in and we'll plane that line down. And be careful not to have what happened to me there happen. The pencil goes into the grain, and when I have this one cut, I'll just mark the other one off it so we get a matching pair. And I'll just make these long cuts, same way I made the cut at the back here, using my knee on my low stool. I'll go cut these and I'll come back and we'll do this detail here at the bottom. So now I have these two angled. The very last thing we need then for assembly is these two little blocks. So what these blocks do is they go here inside and increase the width here at the top, which is a bit more secure, which adds a bit more security, to use English correctly, because that wider area means that our screw is going to pull in and our top can rack less. And I just did this in a very similar way. I cut a piece down the width at the two angles, and then I split it in the middle and just gave it a plane to get those edges nice and matching. I'll just glue these on. Glue should be dry in 20-30 minutes. I'll go for a cup of tea and then we can start assembling this. So tea has been gotten, they're drying, so now we want to set up for cutting our little shape out of the bottom. So the best way to do this, I've found, is to draw half the pattern you want on a piece of card. So you can see there I've actually copied this from the other one. what I'm going to do is cut that pattern out of my piece of card, and then I'll be able to line it up with the center line on my leg, and then just flip it over, and that means I'll get a perfectly symmetrical shape. And of course, you know, if you're going to do batches of these, you could make this out of a piece of solid timber, or just hold on to the card. I'll just show you this one. So I've marked my center line, so I'm just going to take the piece of card, line it up with the center line, hold it, trace around it, flip it over, line it back up with my center line, and bingo, we have a perfectly symmetrical shape. So now it's time to use our new tool in our kit. So it's known as a coping saw, which is great for cutting curves. It's a very thin, flexible blade, but one of the great things about it is you can move the orientation of the blade depending on where you're cutting, so you can get very tight and very accurate cuts. So I'm just going to clamp this to my desk, my bench, pardon me, and we'll start cutting that shape. The principle of this is the same. You want to keep it cut straight and work your way around the curve. Now, if your budget stretches, what's great for doing jobs like this, and you'll use it a hell of a lot, is a jigsaw. You can pick one of those up for maybe 40 or 50 quid. The key with getting a lower price or lower quality tool is to always use high quality consumables. So I've had many inexpensive jigsaws that have lasted me very long over the years, but I always put good blades in it. And since I have my jigsaw and I need to get this done tonight, I'm just going to cut the rest of this with my jigsaw. Now comes the fiddly bit, trying to put this together. So I'm not going to use any glue on this because I want the side panels to be able to expand and contract, and I've slightly wallowed out the whole stool out for that. I'll explain that in better detail in the top when I'm putting it on. But yeah, let's start. So we want to get this in the exact position that we want it in. And I have my marks, and I'll simply screw it together. Now I could put a piece of timber here to get it the right distance up, but I generally have fairly good luck with these things, just lining them up and screwing them. So now, put the top on. Now putting on the top follows pretty much the same process as before. I just want to make sure I got my top side up. I'll sit it there. And I'll just go around checking with a tape that we're even on all sides. I'll mark my holes and then I'll bore them. So you will have noticed when I was drilling that hole that I rocked the bit back and forth. The idea behind that is to create a slot like this, which means, and it's across the grain is going this way, which means that as the wood expands and contracts over time, it gives the top freedom to move so the screw won't cause it to crack. So I'll do that for all of these. I did that for the sides as well, I just didn't show it. And then we can screw it together. Well, no. There's one final touch. As you can see, this top is pretty square and dangerous. So the final touch that I'm going to do is I'm just going to go around all the edges, top and bottom, with my plane. doing the long grain first. Now the end grain. This helps stop breakout here at this point. It also takes all the sharpness off the top, makes it more comfortable to sit on.
And then finally it's time to make this a stool. So just throw in my screws.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I think we have a seat. That is as safe as houses. And I should know I weigh about as much as one. So, now it's time to cut some plugs, plug this, sand the whole thing down, apply some finish. First, I'm going to finish my tea.
So I fill all these plug holes using glue as I showed before, aligning the grain, and then when the glue is set I clean them all off flush using a chisel and then sand it down for finish.
Right, so I sanded this down to 180. One other thing I did was I took a little bit off the width, or reduced the width down to 200. Just makes it look a little bit more stylish and still gives you plenty of room to stand on and sit on. And now it's time for that time. It's Danish Wild time. So, that's this week's video. Thank you as always for staying to the end. Make sure to like, share and subscribe and all that fun stuff. Make sure to tune in next week when we're going to up the difficulty and start doing some new joints we haven't done before when you make the advanced version of this. That would be great in your workshop, but also excellent in the home. So, tune in next week and absolutely do try this at home. We are, new day, same shirt. So this here is my old ghost